It has all been leading to this. Yes, months and months of football coverage when there has been no practice, leading to this show right here. Our 10 players that you must exit your fantasy draft with. We have Hayden Winks, Patrick Daugherty, and I am Josh Norris. Gentlemen, these are the players we're putting our stamp on, the ones that we must draft in every single league this summer. No pressure, Pat. How do you feel about it?
Not great. I don't really truly believe in the concept of a must-have, Josh. I'm going to give a 5-minute explanation for why, it's like a false conceit, but no, I feel good. I'm ending up with all these guys and basically all my drafts, so it'll be a truthful exercise for me.
Well, Hayden Winks, let's start off with you. Who is the player that you must exit every single draft with?
Well, when I went through this process, there's kind of 3 criteria that you have to hit. The price has got to be right. You have to kind of fit into historical trends, like within the positions. I mean, it's like I'm not drafting a first-round quarterback, for example. And then there's got to be volume. So the person that screamed with all 3 of these things was Terry McLaurin. I looked at Yahoo, ESPN, NFL, CBS, all these average draft positions. These are like 6th-round picks. And I think that he's going to be a 4th-round player. He finished with the 24th most fantasy points among rookie wide receivers in NFL history. And that was despite the Washington football team finishing basically dead last in yards and in touchdowns last year. And I think there's some reason for optimism with Terry McLaurin, at least from a volume perspective. Washington has the 7th most available targets. Plus, there's a coaching change, and the coaching change is completely flown under the radar. Last year, Washington, 31st in neutral situation pace. They were 30th in neutral situation pass rate. They finished 28th in pass attempts. Meanwhile, the offensive coordinator that's now calling plays in Washington, 5th in pace, 4th in pass rate, 2nd in pass attempts. I think Terry McLaurin could go all the way up to like 150 targets, and that makes him a potential top 12 fantasy receiver that's being drafted in the 6th round.
I mean, truth be told, Terry McLaurin was my number 1 must draft as well. But Hayden made the case better than I could have, better than anyone could have. I mean, that was the perfect case for Terry McLaurin. Everything you could possibly want. I mean, just a special player. Again, something I like to hit on is someone who lives up to their pre-draft billing immediately. That's what Terry McLaurin did last year for Washington. He was the player. He hit his ceiling immediately, basically. I mean, obviously not from a counting stats perspective, but from like a physical perspective, he already appeared to be near his ceiling, like the best case outcome for his projection. And he did that. And just targets galore. Hayden said much better play calling situation this year. I mean, bad defense. So even if they wanted to run a different paced offense, they're going to have to be passing a ton. And just a special player who's basically in the right place at the right time.
That makes 3 of us. If Hayden didn't get to claim his players first, then I would have nominated Terry McLaurin first as well. He's going as the wide receiver 23 or wide receiver 24 in many leagues right now, 63rd overall. Hayden, I'll go as far as to say Terry McLaurin is a cheat code in fantasy football this season. There is no one who was undervalued or underpriced more than what Terry McLaurin brings to the table. And you mentioned the coaching change to Scott Turner. Terry McLaurin scored 93 targets last season. DJ Moore, who was Scott Turner's number 1 wide receiver in Carolina last year, 135 targets. What is Terry going to do with an extra 42 targets in his lap? He's going to absolutely dominate. He's going to go straight to the moon. This is a player who I have as the overall wide receiver 15. And because of that, because he's going as the wide receiver 23 or 24, I am landing him on basically every single roster this summer.
Josh, specifically on NFL.com, the average draft position, 89th overall. That is 50 spots too low? Like 50?
I mean, it's unbelievable. And I understand if you question the Washington football team in terms of their offensive success this year, like Dwayne Haskins, no matter what you think of him, the best thing we can say is he's an unknown. Okay, at worst, Terry McLaurin's quarterback is going to be Kyle Allen, who put up great numbers for DJ Moore last year. So worst case scenario, you're getting what DJ Moore got last year to land him among the top 10 wide receivers. I'm not going to push it to 150 targets like you did, Hayden, but I will say it's not a shock at all if Terry McLaurin ends as a top 10 wide receiver this year.
Yep. On our last podcast, we had Daigle and everybody in on this. So he is officially Rotoworld's guy this year. What could go wrong?
The only thing holding him back, really, he's too low. His ADP is too low. You can kind of understand. It's just such a crowded. There's so many upside wide receiver twos this year. You know, some people just prefer DJ Shark, DK Metcalf, but I mean, it's very rare that we're all in an alignment on this, and the entire staff basically feels like we have to have Terry McLaurin in our drafts.
I feel like this discussion is going to feature a lot of wide receivers, so I'll just nominate the next one here. My first one is Will Fuller. Will Fuller is going as the wide receiver 30 right now, around 71st overall. And I am well above consensus. In fact, I've moved him up recently to wide receiver 25. And by now you've seen the eye-popping numbers that Will Fuller has posted in a full 16 games played with DeSean Watson. 82 catches, over 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I mean, the duo's combination verges on rare. And I want to suggest this first and put it out there first. The only thing holding him back is injuries. Yes, he's only played in 42 of a possible 64 games. But now that that's on the table, I want all of you to forget it. Because if you play hesitant, if you play risk averse in fantasy football, you're not going to win your league. And there is no one who has a higher ceiling going where he is right now in drafts than Will Fuller. I understand there are people like AJ Green and Devontae Parker and T.Y. Hilton going ahead of him in your leagues right now. None of those are pristine resumes at the moment, because Will Fuller is a perfect combination to his quarterback and DeSean Watson, with wide receiver 1 targets available with DeAndre Hopkins gone. And I understand, again, that he's missed some time in the past. Let your league mates worry about that while you run to the end, to the finish line with Will Fuller just in wide receiver 3 territory right now.
I mean, every NFL player is injury prone to an extent, but I do still understand, injury question marks Will Fuller, obviously. So basically every draft, I'm trying to get at least one of Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, and Will Fuller. And, they're a slightly different tier. And Marquise Brown and Will Fuller are almost tiered exactly together. And so I want Will Fuller on my team. So the reason he's 3 of 3 is because this is not a normal injury history. This is basically Jordan Reed level. He's not a super young player anymore. And so I can understand the fading and the hesitance a little bit. Wide receiver 34 is probably a little too low, but it's not completely inappropriate for Will Fuller. Will Fuller, to me, wide receiver 28 to 36 range. So, just basically the wide receiver 3 range. And so the upside, he's at the right ADP, basically, in my opinion, where we're baking in some injury risk still. Because, again, this is not a normal injury history. I mean, what his career high for games, I think, is maybe 14. And, every year he's not just missing 1 or 2 games. Every year he's missing 4 or 5 games. And some of this is chronic, of course. He's a chronic hamstring injury. But to me, he's at the exact perfect ADP for someone with his injury history and someone with his upside. And again, he's someone I want on my teams, but I just feel more comfortable with other people that don't miss 5 or 6 games every year. And again, that's not scientific. Maybe he's just not injury prone. Maybe it's just been complete bad luck. But I am not out there counseling people to just completely ignore Will Fuller's injury history.
Yeah, I am kind of. But I also want to bring up 2 points. You mentioned games missed. At the very least, to me, he should be going ahead of T.Y. Hilton, who's missed a handful of games. He hasn't played a full 16-game season since 2017. He should also be going ahead of A.J. Green, who missed all of last season and is in a much worse offense, most likely, with a new quarterback and a play caller we know nothing about, and probably the worst offensive line in the NFL. And then Devontae Parker, who has 1 season. I'm really asking him, at the very least, to be jumped up above those 3 names. Hayden, where do you land on Will Fuller this year?
I'm buying him. For me, what I've been doing in fantasy drafts is getting 3 wide receivers in the rounds 3, 4, 5, and then come back with Will Fuller in the 6th rounds, where you're not banking on him playing. But if he's your flex guy and he's putting up 20 points a week in some occasions, then you're in a really good spot. He has added muscle. He's worked on his flexibility this offseason, and he kind of has to. He's going into the number 1 role. He's playing for a big contract. Remember, he is still on his rookie deal. He has to make it happen this year. So I think his average draft position is probably 5 or 6 wide receivers too low. And I think that's the perfect person to throw in your flex spot, because we want to be hammering all these Terry McLaurins, other guys we'll be talking about later today, in the 3rd through 5th rounds. Add Will Fuller right on top, and then you're looking at potential first place.
Final points. 1, if Will Fuller doesn't hit, as Hayden mentioned, he's your wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. That doesn't tank your fantasy season. That can be easily replaced. And second, we know nothing about Tim Kelly, but what we do know is how the Texans have built their offense this summer, and it's adding even another vertical element in Brandon Cooks and an underneath element in Randall Cobb. And it's because they are playing straight into the best parts of Deshaun Watson's game. I mean, he was the second best adjusted deep ball passer in the NFL last season with a completion rate of 54%. Who is going to take advantage of that? It's Will Fuller and it's Brandon Cooks. And I know that Will Fuller's high targets has been 92, and that was during his rookie year, and it's only pretty much gone down since then. I bet he gets 110 this year, especially if he hits 16 games this year. But that's just my spiel. Pat.
Hey man, fourth most available targets in the league the Texans have. So
love it.
Opportunities there.
Shoot for the moon. Aim for the moon. All right, Pat.
I'm not thrilled about this one, and I'm going to Aaron Jones. And basically, I should say it's Aaron Jones or DeAndre Hopkins, depending on who I get in the first round. But I'm just adamant that we continue to overthink Aaron Jones. I mean, everyone, the headline is the touchdown regression, which obviously is going to happen. He's not going to score 19 touchdowns again. Even if he scored only 8 to 10 touchdowns, to me, he's still a clear RB1. And we've been responsible with Aaron Jones. So he was the RB4 last year in both standard and PPR by average weekly points. And he's going as the RB10. So we are being responsible with Aaron Jones. We are baking in that regression. But I just have a hard time seeing how someone who's so explosive as a runner, extremely explosive as a receiver, is going to finish outside the top 12. This is a run-based offense. It's an offense that we know needed to add pass catchers more than almost any offense in the league, and they didn't do it. He is one of their best receivers. He's going to remain heavily involved in the passing game. We don't know if A.J. Dillon, who got 0 offseason reps, is just going to be thrown into the fire of a goal line role. And even if he is, there's going to be enough touchdowns for Aaron Jones. There's going to be enough carries. There's going to be enough overall volume. And he's just this explosive player that the whole fantasy industry has always loved. He's lived up to our high expectations. And now he's being treated as essentially radioactive. And in the first round, if I miss out on the big 4 or 5 at running back, I'm gladly taking a receiver and then taking Aaron Jones in the second round. And I'm ending up with Aaron Jones on an extremely high percentage of my teams.
Pat, I love this because while so many people are avoiding Aaron Jones this year, you're not. So that means you're ending up with him on a ton of teams. And I understand the viewpoint that you're bringing up, where we kind of get, as this football bubble, into this groupthink idea that, oh, well, Aaron Jones, isn't going to get 23 carries inside the 5-yard line. He's not going to get 16 rushing touchdowns again. So we need to move him way down. But your point of him being the running back 4 last year and now being drafted around running back 12 or running back 14 area, that's already baked into it. And it's not like he's going to play less snaps than he did last year, Pat. I mean, he only played 60% of the backfield snaps for the Packers last season. So he's going to maintain that number. The opportunities and the efficiency might not quite be there, but I do wonder if I can even take a step back, because I even have him as my running back 14. If I am thinking too much about this and pushing him too far down when it's kind of already baked into it.
Yeah, I just don't understand really what people are thinking. This is a run-based offense, and he's one of their most important receivers. That's what you look for in a fantasy running back. And just getting so focused on the fact that he's going to score fewer touchdowns, I just think people are kind of losing the larger point there, that this is a special running back. He did what he was supposed to do last year, and he's set up to once again do it this year.
Yeah, from a roster construction standpoint, you want 2 of these top 14 running backs, and Aaron Jones is clearly a rock solid second round draft pick. Even with the negative regression coming down, he is being properly priced. And I think that we shouldn't go overboard with this. I think that he's right in the range where you're going to be debating him or DeAndre Hopkins or Tyreek Hill or Julio Jones. And those are the type of guys that you want in the second round. I don't think that there's the total ceiling is there. I think A.J. Dillon's going to be involved to a certain degree, but especially if the Packers give him a huge contract, which they're kind of debating right now, I would move him up a little bit just to give him, I feel a little more reassured that he's going to get the full workload that he got last year if they give him the money. Otherwise, he's going into a contract season. They just drafted a second round running back. But regardless, I think the second round price tag is totally fair. That is baking in the touchdowns that he's going to be losing just because A.J. Dillon weighs 247 pounds and has the biggest legs I've ever seen.
All right, we are through our first 3 names of the 10 players we must exit every single fantasy draft with. Hayden Winks, you're up next with the second wave.
All right, so when I was doing my research here, I learned that the wide receivers in the rounds 3 through 6, they have the highest win rates. You want to be targeting the receivers there. They outproduce the running backs by a lot in this range. So somebody that is falling right into this mix is Robert Woods. He's being drafted in the 5th round to 6th round, depending on where you're drafting. I think he can be a 3rd round type of player. He was the wide receiver 4 overall from weeks 9 through 16 last year. He was, the Rams have 126 available targets. They lost Brandon Cooks. They didn't really replace him with anybody. And the other thing is just the floor is so high for one reason. The Rams are first in pass rate when they're trailing. They're also first in offensive pace while they're trailing. So the play is going to be there. The volume is going to be there specifically to Robert Woods. If they use 2 wide receiver sets like we saw them experiment with last season, I think Robert Woods could be a top 12 in just overall targets this year. And I know he's not like the craziest touchdown scorer, but there's a little bit of positive regression coming his way. And I think that the Rams are going to have to pass the ball more so just because their team's not as good.
I mean, Robert Woods is this kind of Sean McVay's like rain or shine wide receiver, where even if they're experimenting with new personnel sets, slightly new offensive approaches, he's not coming off the field. There was a little weirdness with Cooper Kupp last year. There was no weirdness with Robert Woods. Like, he is the key piece of their passing attack. And the floor is just so high. Maybe the ceiling isn't what you want it to be. I mean, this is such a bankable floor. He's somebody that's not getting talked about at all this summer. And, that is silly. We should be talking about Robert Woods more.
And while, this is an off-season unlike any other, it certainly seems like there's going to be certain teams across the league that basically bring the band back together. They're sticking to the same formula. They could have an advantage. Maybe that's taking a walk down Narrative Street. And while this Rams team is going to look different from a personnel grouping standpoint or changes that they've made from the coaching staff, Robert Woods is the consistent, right? He's the constant. And it's not his role that is necessarily changing. It's Cooper Kupp's. Yet I think we are all kind of discounting the entire group, and Robert Woods included. And your point, Hayden, about how this is a team, if they're going to be trailing and when they're losing, they basically like abandon the run. They like play how we play Madden and just want to throw the football every single time. That might happen for the Rams more this season than it has in previous seasons. And if that's the case, then Robert Woods is going to, again, remain that constant force.
The Rams literally abandoned the run, and they cut Todd Gurley for no financial benefit to their team. So, they're just not going to run this year.
84% pass rate while they're trailing, like when their winning percentage is under 25%, 84%. The rest of the league is like in like the low 70s. So that's a pretty big number to keep your eye on. And like if you're trying to pair cheese with wine, little Robert Woods, his floor, a little bit later, Will Fuller with the ceiling. I like that.
It. I like that very much. I like my cheese and wine. Okay, let's go next to the tight end position. We've spent many conversations this summer talking about that group after the tight end 12 player in terms of enticing options like Mike Gesicki, like Noah Fant, even some Blake Jarwin fans out there. I'm going to throw out Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith could be the name that emerges from that pack this year and turns into a top 7 tight end. First, let's rewind a little bit. Like in Tennessee, Delanie Walker, and I understand that Arthur Smith wasn't the play caller during this time, but he had target seasons of 102, 106, 111, and 133 targets. It's absolutely within the realm of possibility that Jonnu Smith emerges as the number 2 pass catching option in this offense, only behind A.J. Brown. Now, A.J. Brown only saw, 84 targets last season, which is like not NFL football as we know it now. Like that's an abysmal low rate. It's because this Titans team was 30th in total offensive plays and 30th in pass attempts plus sacks. Do we really think, and I don't, and maybe I'm skeptical here, but do we really think that that type of formula is going to win in back-to-back years for the Titans? This pass to take the lead early in games off play action and then just run Derrick Henry a bunch. I think the rest of the league that is forced to throw and does throw more often to win throughout an entire game is the more sustainable formula. And because of that, I'm not so sure if the Titans are going to be able to get by with just these low target volume players. And if that's the case, you have Jonnu Smith as the beneficiary after last season ranking just 7th in yards per route run, only behind certified studs like George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Tyler Higbee, Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, and Jared Cook. And Pat, we know that yards per route run has been a tremendous gauge of the potential of a player in previous seasons.
Yeah, and Jonnu's case is so good because even if the passing volume does remain low, say they pull this off. I've been writing about this all offseason where the Titans, play like the lowest style for margin for error offense in the NFL where it comes to play action, the pass, then establish the run. We know that's a low margin for error, like you said. But even if they do it successfully again, I mean, Jonnu Smith is like a clear-cut path to being the number 2 target in the passing game. And he's someone, he fits the offense perfectly. He's a yak dynamo. He's just so dynamic with the ball in his hands. They're already talking about that again this summer. The tight ends coach is saying, we got to get Jonnu Smith. We got to get the ball in his hands. We can be creative to get the ball in his hands. And tight end like 10 to 20 range is one of the most interesting ranges like at any position in fantasy this year. But another point you kind of hinted at where like a lot of these guys kind of have question marks. They're like maybe the 3rd or 4th option in their passing attack. Jonnu is at worst number 3 and quite possibly number 2. So he's just an excellent value and, just such a clear-cut breakout candidate this year.
Yeah, when you're in this tight end 2 mix, the first thing you want to be looking for is athleticism. And Jonnu Smith, 93rd percentile spark athlete, ran the 40 in 4.62 seconds. So we're talking about a total stud athletically. And we saw it last year. He was breaking a lot of tackles. He was trucking people. He was running around DBs. It was pretty insane to watch. The one thing is just the volume, and I'm just not sure if I can get there. In the 13 starts with Tannehill last year, he averaged 30.8 receiving yards. He only caught 2.2 passes per game, and he only caught 6 passes during the 3 games in the playoffs last year. So if you do believe in Jonnu Smith, then you should probably be buying Ryan Tannehill late too if you're in a 2-quarterback league, just because Jonnu Smith has to get the team to pass the ball more because I don't think that the targets are just going to funnel his way if the passing rate stays the same.
We've been aligned all summer, Hayden Winks, and now you're just trying to break my heart. Yes, Jonnu Smith posted the 2nd best yards after catch numbers in the NFL last season at the tight end position. I mean, he and Delaney Walker, if you combine their targets last year, it nets you 75. I think that's his absolute floor this year because, again, I just don't think that same script is going to work exactly like it did last year and all the pieces align perfectly like it did for the Titans. And if this team even has to jump up to like the 20th in total offensive plays or 20th in pass attempts plus sacks, which isn't even league average, right, or in the middle, then you're going to get more targets, and more targets just means more opportunity for Jonnu Smith. Okay, Pat, you're up next.
Yeah, it's Marquise Brown for me. Like I said earlier, I want to get at least one of Marquise Brown, Will Fuller, and Terry McLaurin. I mean, ideally 2 of them. And the case is very straightforward. Probably one of the most explosive players in the NFL. Someone who again kind of lived up to his pre-draft billing as a rookie, even as he was banged up all year. Missed a ton of practice. A lot of times did not play a full complement of snaps, but still hit so many big plays with Lamar Jackson, an offense, that seeks big passing plays down the field. And now he's healthy. The Ravens did not, but the Ravens were very light at receiver, like the Packers. They only added 1 body. This was a 3rd-round receiver, 3rd-round rookie that can't be projected for much. So there's so little target competition. Such a special, explosive talent, and one of the league's best offenses. An obvious sophomore leap, and just someone in that wide receiver 3 range that, none of us should be surprised if Marquise Brown leaps all the way to wide receiver 1. I'm not saying that's the most likely outcome, but the setup is there for that to happen. And just a special player and a special offense.
I think the only question, Pat, is that he's all summer just been climbing. And it's not because of news that's been coming out other than him gaining like 25 pounds or whatever it is. But he's jumped all the way up to wide receiver 26 now, Pat. And while that still is technically in that wide receiver 3 tier, he's almost at the top of that wide receiver 3 tier. And I understand it. Like I talked about earlier with Will Fuller, I want these types in that after you get after your first 2 wide receivers, ones who have the potential to go to the moon. And Marquise Brown absolutely has that. He did not play last season 100% healthy. And even though he did not play 100% healthy, he was absolutely electric. And we love what Greg Roman does offensively. And going back to the point of casts coming together, and especially one of the best offenses in the NFL, nothing has changed for this Baltimore Ravens team. And Marquise Brown absolutely is in a position to really take even a bigger leap than we even saw from the great player during his rookie season.
Well, this offseason is.
Josh did make an interesting point that there's no longer much of a discount on that ADP that he's being drafted, but we all still think there's room for him to still outperform even that high ADP. And it's just the range of the board where I'd rather be betting on upside than floor.
Well, the one thing we know is we're going to get a healthier player. He only played 3 games at a 75+% snap rate last year, and that includes down the stretch when he went completely nuclear in the playoffs. They removed the screw from his foot, like a literal screw in his foot that cannot feel good running. And this entire offseason, Lamar Jackson just keeps tweeting videos of Marquise Brown blowing by cornerbacks with the little wind emoji in the flames, and that's probably a good thing if your quarterback is thinking really highly of you. So. And then the other thing is the Ravens, they led on 73% of their second half plays last year. That was by far the most in the league. If that comes down a couple ticks, Marquise Brown should get a couple more targets to him. So I think a boom bust wide receiver 3 with a wide receiver 2 ceiling, I think that's completely justifiable where he's being drafted.
I have a screw in my wrist, Hayden. Is that like the equivalent? Yes. Is that the equivalent of a blurber having as a football player, as a wide receiver, having a screw in their foot? Wouldn't we say that?
Yeah, you're getting the Alex Smith comeback blurber of the year.
There we go.
So you should have gotten that out during quarantine. Missed opportunity.
Wrist surgery from high school lacrosse. Okay, one more wave of our 10 players that we must draft this summer. Hayden Winks, go ahead.
So a lot of the data shows that you should not be drafting quarterbacks early. So if I'm following through with that, I got to find somebody that's being drafted in double-digit rounds. And when I looked at Yahoo, ESPN, NFL.com, CBS, Matthew Stafford is not being drafted until well after the 100th overall pick. Last year, he played 8 games healthy. He was the quarterback 5 through those first 8 games. And I think that this was not just some outlier season from him. Yes, his numbers were outlier-ish, but it was the offensive coordinator that really changed the whole dynamic of the Lions. They passed the ball downfield at a much higher rate. We kind of saw Stafford get scaled back a couple years ago. He was first in yards per attempt. He was first in aggressiveness, and that kind of matches up with the pieces around him. Kenny Golladay is great downfield. Marvin Jones is great downfield. Hopefully we get TJ Hawkinson. Hopefully we get DeAndre Swift added to Danny Amendola. This is going to be a really pass-heavy team. They have the 6th easiest passing schedule in the league, and they have the 25th highest projected wins. They're going to be passing the ball a ton, and Matthew Stafford's done it time and time and again. So I think he's my 10th round quarterback option if you've skipped out on the Lamar Jacksons, the Dak Prescotts, the Deshaun Watsons of the world.
I mean, these weren't just subtle adjustments with Matthew Stafford last year. He was basically transformed as a quarterback. He had the highest deep percentage in the league. His percent of passes that were 20 yards or longer. Next-gen stats, he was the most aggressive quarterback in the league. And next-gen stats also, he threw farther beyond the sticks than any quarterback in the league. So he adopted an entirely new mentality last year, kind of like probably the Matthew Stafford he always wanted to be. Super aggressive down the field, forcing the issue down the field. And still, and the turnovers, though, had not. So the concern was Matthew Stafford, they reined him in because of the turnovers. The turnovers did not return last year, even with this new aggressive style, still had a very acceptable interception percentage. And I mean, he was playing at an MVP level before he got hurt. It's been kind of memory hold for obvious reasons because the Lions weren't a playoff team, and then they completely fell apart after Matthew Stafford went down. But I mean, he was having an amazing season. Yeah, if they stick with this style, they have the personnel for Matthew Stafford to be a fantasy beast, and just a different kind of quarterback last year, and someone I'm very, very interested in as one of my late-round quarterbacks.
Hayden, he's going as the quarterback 12. We as a group, as a collective, have him as the quarterback 9. Is it simply because this position is loaded? I mean, names like Tom Brady, Drew Brees are on the board, and they didn't miss nearly as much time as Matthew Stafford last year. Is that the reason why he's just not getting the respect and going high enough in drafts this summer?
Yeah, definitely. And probably people don't realize how good this personnel is. Marvin Jones, criminally underrated. Kenny Golladay is also probably somebody that's underrated to the average fan. And then you didn't see them play well the last 8 games because he wasn't on the field. But yeah, I mean, this is the Stafford that we've been waiting for. I mean, he has one of the best arms in the league. Why weren't they using it? It's just crazy to me. So finally we get the new offensive coordinator in there to actually play to his strengths. And then we saw elite production. So I think he can be a tier 2, tier 3 quarterback this year. And he's being priced as like a tier 4 guy.
I've been waiting for this quite literally my entire professional life. I was very infamous early in my career for being too high on Matthew Stafford every year. And it turns out it was just 8 or 9 years too early.
Yeah, look, I think it's totally cool and a great strategy to go after Matthew Stafford as quarterback 12 or like Cam Newton as quarterback 15 or even Ben Roethlisberger as quarterback 18 where he's going now, because if they fail, like if they aren't the same players after their injuries last year, then once again, you can just fall back on the position never being deeper than it is now and just stream it based on matchups, because there's going to be great quarterbacks out there each and every week that have a good matchup and they're out in your waiver wire. So take that shot in your drafts. And if it fails, then just fall back on some of the options that'll be out there during the regular season.
Whatever you do not take Drew Brees. He looks like he's like 56 years old. Take Stafford over Drew Brees, please.
That's ageism, Hayden Winks, just because you're a youthful 24 years old. I mean,
look at what Tom Brady looks like. Tom Brady looks like an incredible athlete. He looks like a 33-year-old. I saw the picture of Drew Brees, and I had to flip-flop Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas in my rankings because of that.
It's the avocados. I'm for sure it's the avocados. Okay, let's go next with DeSean Jackson. You know me this summer. I've talked about Jalen Reagor all offseason. And I still think Jalen Reagor is a fantastic bet around that wide receiver 36, at least for me. That's where I'm going to take him. But this has even led to DeSean Jackson falling further and further in drafts. Right now he's going as the wide receiver 55. He's my wide receiver 46, and I'm trying to add him on every single team, even if I get Jalen Reagor, and especially if I get Carson Wentz. I mean, last year they put all of their eggs, the Eagles, in the explosive basket of DeSean Jackson, and it worked out great in one game. But when that went away, this team relied on their tight ends, and that's it. Only their tight ends. I mean, when was the last time 2 tight ends led the team in targets in a season? It's been decades. The Philadelphia Eagles did that last year. There's going to be one wide receiver that kind of nuzzles his way into there and fills that gap. And I think it could be DeSean Jackson. I absolutely think it could be Jalen Reagor. But Jackson's even more of a value now because Howie Roseman recognized this offseason, okay, we need that vertical playmaker still. And that's why they went out and drafted Jalen Reagor and went out and drafted John Hightower and Marquise Goodwin they traded for, who has since opted out. But the constant is still there. The veteran is still there. And I'm shocked that with all of this love lately, and deservedly so for Jalen Reagor and what he can do during his rookie season, that people are still overlooking DeSean Jackson. And all of you out there need to change that.
I don't have a ton to add other than an imperfect statistic. So DeSean is old. He's going to be 34 this season, but so yards per catch is obviously a highly imperfect statistic. But DeSean Jackson's yards per catch has been under 17 one time since 2013, and I would say that aligns with the eye test, where he has really not lost a step for speed, and yet he is still one of the most special deep threats, most effective deep threats in the entire league. And the Eagles have been obsessed with trying to solve this problem of a lack of deep threat for several years now, and he still seems like the man for the job. Him and Jalen Reagor both, but no one should be surprised basically if DeSean Jackson is still DeSean Jackson this season.
And they're going to be using these 2 wide receiver sets because they have the 2 tight ends. Alshon Jeffrey on PUP list, probably going to miss like the first 6 games of the season. And there was a report DeSean Jackson is as fast as ever. And they posted a clip of him blowing by Darius Slay in practice. So, Rotopat said it. He averaged the most yards per catch in the NFL just 2 seasons ago. And the Eagles just didn't have that element last year. That should be coming back. I think DeSean Jackson's going to have a couple top 24 receiver weeks. Now it's just going to be on us to figure out when those are going to be coming. But as your wide receiver 7, the last guy on your bench, why not?
That's what I'm saying. And since DeSean Jackson first departed this team, they'd been searching for DeSean Jackson. We had that year of Mike Wallace. We had Shelton Gibson draft picks, all these randos.
Matt Collins, man.
Matt Collins. Guess what? The original is back, and the original can still do it in his mid-30s. And again, Hayden, exactly what you're saying. As your wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6 or wide receiver 7, most likely, there is absolutely no reason to avoid a player with his talent who has an immediate role that is planted firmly on the depth chart, who's also playing with a quarterback who has played an MVP level in his past. If you love Jalen Reagor, in my opinion, you should also be loving DeSean Jackson. And there's a 20 gap in terms of wide receiver picks in them right now. All right, Pat, one more name from you. Who is it?
Someone I've been kind of late to this summer because, like I mentioned before, like the tight end, like 11 to 20 range is just so full of intriguing players that I was kind of sleeping on Chris Herndon. But now I'm ending up with Chris Herndon in almost every team I've had in August, or kind of start where I tend to stop either Gronk or Austin Hooper's fall. I take them as like the tight end 10 or 11, but then I just love pairing them with Chris Herndon, who's still like in that tight end 18 to 22 range. And like someone, again, who a lot of these intriguing second, third year pros at tight end, they're kind of luxuries for their teams, like the number 3 or 4 option in the passing game, whereas Chris Herndon can't be a luxury for the Jets. You know, they have no set really target delineation on offense. They have so few proven connections for Sam Darnold, and they really, really need Chris Herndon this year. Like, he's not a luxury for the Jets. He's someone they need to be a huge part of the offense. They need to absorb a ton of targets. And someone as a rookie, as a 4th-round rookie in 2018, had one of the better rookie seasons for a tight end this century, over 500 yards. You see that very rarely from rookie tight ends. And someone on media reports saying that they can't wait to unleash. And he's just an excellent athlete in a position where the Jets need him to produce. And like, they're still excited about him even after a loss 2019. And I'm surprised his ADP is not higher.
Yeah, Pat, we've seen what a passing offense looks like when Jamison Crowder is the focal point of that passing offense, and it's a 5'9" ceiling, you know? And I'm with you. I mean, where he's going right now, Chris Herndon, as the tight end 21, as an ADP of 135, Chris Herndon absolutely should be, if you like miss out and it just doesn't feel right in those middle rounds or early rounds of a tight end selection, Chris Herndon is the one I want to leave with every single time. During his rookie season, I'll go back to yards per route run. He was 11th in the NFL, again, behind those massive names like George Kittle and Travis Kelce, and I can keep going, Rob Gronkowski, and on the list. He was magnificent during his rookie season, despite, not as much opportunity as those of us on the outside would have liked. And that is rare for a tight end to do. He's even more discounted now than he was last offseason. And hey, it would not be shocking at all. Hopefully he plays 16 games, because if he does, he's absolutely going to finish as a top 15 tight end. We need to figure out a 10th name because we've done 9 nominations. We need a 10th. So I'm going to nominate a few names, Pat, and you let me know if you like these suggestions. Okay?
All right.
I think you and I are quite different on Henry Ruggs.
Well, I'm just fading the Raiders. The Raiders, are they going to attempt 800 passes this year? This is what I don't understand with the Raiders, is basically every single Raiders pass catcher is hyped, and they have like 3 pass catching running backs. I just don't understand where the targets are going to come from. So I'm kind of just avoiding the situation in general. Okay.
How about Diontae Johnson? I think Diontae Johnson should absolutely be the name out there that everyone is going after. He's going as like the wide receiver 38 right now. And the reason for that, Pat, is because in 2018, Ben Roethlisberger was the quarterback 2 overall in fantasy points per game. Now, that was with Juju Smith-Schuster as a top 10 wide receiver, and that was with Antonio Brown as a top 5 wide receiver. Not saying that Diontae Johnson is a top 5 wide receiver, but everything is set up for success for this Steelers team if Ben Roethlisberger can stay healthy. It's a good offensive line. James Conner is back healthy. Juju Smith-Schuster is still very good in the slot. The defense is even better than it was back then. I see it an easy path, I should say, for Diontae Johnson to wind up as a top 24 wide receiver this year. And again, he's going as the wide receiver 38.
Yeah, despite former Rotoworlder Ian Hartitz's best efforts, I've just had trouble forming a strong opinion on Diontae Johnson this offseason. I don't really know why, but the path to upside is self-evident, like you just said. And Ben Roethlisberger, the last time he played a full season, threw for the 7th most yards in NFL history. And as we know, now, there's no Antonio Brown now. And Diontae Johnson is a very strong 2008. He was very hyped early in the offseason, and for some reason, I feel like the hype train has kind of trailed off. But the path there to a breakout is very clear cut.
Hey, and how do you feel about Diontae Johnson as our 10th name?
Not as good of a name as Chase Edmonds, but I'm fine with it. I think Diontae Johnson is somebody that can be your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 in fantasy drafts. And he's got the ceiling, and he's a really good route runner. He's probably one of the most underrated raw talents. You are just attaching yourself to Big Ben, who tore 3 of his 5 elbow ligaments last year, and he's 37 years old. But if that's not a big deal, you're looking at a potential top 24 guy.
And
All right.
Diontae Johnson, as opposed to his teammate James Washington, doesn't dive for no reason on every target. So that is also very good. He's got that working in his favor.
All right. Here's our list of the 10 players that you must draft in fantasy football this year. Hayden Winks' recommendations: Matthew Stafford, Robert Woods, Terry McLaurin, Patrick Daugherty's, Aaron Jones, Marquise Brown, and Chris Herndon. And mine, Will Fuller, Jonnu Smith, DeSean Jackson, and number 10, Diontae Johnson, wide receiver, Pittsburgh Steelers. I love this list, gentlemen. Some differences with Pat's and even with Hayden's and mine, but in the end, I think this is a very positive list that people can learn from. And if all of you out there want to see the rest of our rankings for every single type of scoring, if you have custom scoring, you can enter that. And we'll spit out our own projections. Just go over to rotoworld.com/edge for our premium products. Mock drafts all over the place. Every single player profile of every single relevant fantasy player out there for the season. Again, the best way to do that is annual subscription or a monthly subscription to rotoworld.com/edge.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.